being taken away from us by those in power.
Emily Suttle-Braun previously dated Graham Platmer and wrote an op-ed after the latest allegations emerged this week, and she joins me now. Emily, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So first, just your reaction to him saying that he's suspending his campaign.
I mean, I think this is the right thing to do. It's what we've all been expecting. And so glad to see it's finally happened.
What do you make of him saying this isn't because of the allegations? There have been multiple of them, not just the one made by Jennifer this week of rape, but also allegations of physical abuse in a relationship with Lindsay Fifield. That reporting was in the New York Times, although there are lots of questions about how they did that reporting before the primary. What do you make of him saying this isn't about the allegations, but about the Democratic Party and all of the funding mechanisms saying we're no longer going to move forward with him as a candidate?
Well, I think that's a really disappointing response. I think most women out there would say that that's a very disappointing response. And I'm sure that in particular, the women that have come forward believe that that's a very disappointing response. Ultimately, I think there was no way forward for this campaign. And clearly, this candidate is not willing to take accountability for what has gone on.
What do you make of the folks in the Democratic Party, big backers like Ro Khanna, for example, who continued to say they backed his candidacy, even though there were other allegations previous to the allegation that came out this week? And now they have obviously this week pulled their endorsements. But how do they reconcile that, given that, you know, they didn't believe the first woman who was accusing him of certain things that were corroborated by friends, family members, et cetera. But then another allegation came out and they then decided that was the final straw. How do you reconcile the support and now pulling it?
I don't know that there is a way to reconcile it, and I think this is something that my piece touches on a fair bit, is that believing women doesn't mean believing a woman who is in a particular political party. These issues transcend political party, and I think that's what we're seeing play out here is, to your point, some of these earlier accusations were not taken seriously, and now that a more credible source has come forward, they are again, disappointing.
So you dated Graham Platner about a decade ago. You described him as warm, fun. You had a very different experience with him than these women did. You said that you were thrilled he was running for Senate against Susan Collins. You believed he was, quote, the Mom Donnie for Maine. Do you still believe that?
I think two things can be true at the same time. I think he ran an exceptional campaign. I think there's a reason that he was able to galvanize the support that he did in Maine, record numbers of volunteers, and at the same time was clearly a deeply flawed individual, a deeply flawed candidate. As I said in the piece, this was a very casual relationship over a decade ago. I cannot speak to what occurred with these other women because I can only speak to my own individual experience. But I think you speak about the Ro Khannas of the world and the Democratic institution. Democrats at the moment are desperate for the right candidates that represent them. Democrats, whether it's voters, whether it's the institution, the state parties, the party, are desperate to find candidates that are going to break through and are going to persuade voters. And I think that he ran a campaign that really showed that he could do that. Unfortunately, obviously, there were deeper skeletons in the closet that, in the end, did not mean the campaign could go forward.
Yeah, I really like what you said in your piece about how just because you had a good experience with him did not discount the allegations that are corroborated that we heard from a number of different women, both prior to the primary and in the lead up to the deadline of him not being able to be replaced on the ballot. He voluntarily, we don't know all the details of what happened today in the lead up to this. He's been locked down for a couple of days. There's been infighting in Maine. But what do you make of the path forward? I mean, there is this argument to be made that, look, despite what has happened, everything that he's been accused of is absolutely horrific and awful. But he did win a primary, and a lot of these allegations were out there when voters went to the polls in Maine and voted for him. Lots of Democrats voted for him knowing half of this story.
Yeah, and lots of voters voted for Donald Trump knowing about his 28 allegations. So, yes, the politicking of it all. I think that this speaks to progressive values and the fact that Maine clearly has indicated that they want a progressive candidate. It's why Janet Mills wasn't really a viable candidate from the start. In terms of a path forward, I can't speak to who the replacement candidate will be. There's a lot of great names that are being floated, but ultimately we're going to need to listen to the voters of Maine and choose the type of candidate that they want to represent them. And I think that's what makes this really sad, is that there's a lot of people in the state. Maine is a very tight-knit community that are really grieving the loss of this candidate. They feel duped. They feel like something was taken from them. And the Democratic Party is going to have a real job ahead of them to try and make that right.
Do they feel duped? I mean, there is an argument to be made that they were perfectly fine with a lot of this when he was polling well against Susan Collins, and then right up against the deadline, his polling goes down. You have another allegation that is similar, although worse than previous allegations, and now all of a sudden they want to get him out of the race. I mean, it seemed like they were fine with a lot of the problems of his candidacy up until the very end.
I think that's a little bit convenient. I mean, I would agree that there's definitely been a level of comfort with some of the earlier.
I mean, he had a Nazi tattoo. He was on this app called Kick that is notorious for the sex trafficking of underage girls. There were the allegations that he had been physically abusive to other women. There were, of course, he proclaimed he was an oyster farmer and that's how he made his living. He doesn't do it; it's a hobby for him, and we knew all of that. So it's interesting to see that Democrats all of a sudden changed their mind when the polling went south.
Again, I think that's a little bit convenient. I do think that these are two very different issues that we're looking at. Like, these are serious allegations of rape. I think the Nazi tattoo, these other.
Did he have the tattoo when you dated him?
I actually couldn't tell you. Like, we both have and had tattoos. Whether or not he had that tattoo, I don't know. There was a lot of drinking involved. Not my finest hour, although not the type of thing that I would be suspending a campaign over. But I do think that a lot of that was
like a large skull on his chest.
No.
Okay.
But a lot of that has been explained. A lot of that has been explained in a way that was
It's definitely been explained. Whether it was truthful or not is a different story.
Sure, and I would agree with that. But it's been explained in a way that was clearly satisfactory to voters, or he wouldn't have had the primary win that he had.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The Democratic Party is far too tolerant of Nazi memorabilia, especially tattooed on someone's bodies, after they accused Republicans of being Nazis for years. But that's a discussion for another time. Emily, great to see you. Thank you for taking that time to come in to talk about this. It's breaking news.